heavy steel bar clangs behind an unsuspecting toddler, shattering the silence and his sense of safety forever. We are retracing the exact steps of the most forbidden study in history to see how a neutral stimulus becomes a lifelong nightmare. What happened to the boy whose innocence was sacrificed for a theory? In 1920, at Johns Hopkins University, a 9-month-old baby sat calmly on a mat in a plain research room. Researchers placed a white rat in front of him. He reached toward it, curious, unafraid. They tested him with a rabbit, unafraid, a dog, unafraid, cotton wool, a burning newspaper, a Santa Claus mask. Every time, the same reaction. Calm curiosity. No fear at all. This baby's name, recorded in the study, was Albert B. History would come to know him as Little Albert. The psychologist running the experiment was a man named John B. Watson, and he had a radical ambition. He believed emotions like fear weren't innate. He believed they were built, conditioned, installed, the same way you might train a dog to salivate at a bell. Watson had already built a career arguing against the dominant psychology of his era, the idea that the mind was full of unconscious drives and hidden meaning. He wanted something simpler, something you could observe and measure directly. Stimulus, response, nothing more. Watson had already demonstrated this kind of conditioning in animals, but animal behavior was easy to dismiss as instinct. To make his case undeniable, he needed a subject whose reactions could not be explained away as animal reflex. He needed something closer to us, and he believed he could prove it, using a human infant as his proof. Here's how he did it. Watson brought the white rat back in front of Albert, just like before. But this time, the moment Albert reached toward it, an assistant standing behind him struck a 4-foot steel bar with a hammer right behind the baby's head. The sound was violent, sudden, deafening in that small room. Albert, startled, fell forward and began to cry. They repeated this. Rat appears, steel bar strikes. Albert cries. Rat appears, steel bar strikes. Albert cries. Over and over, across multiple sessions, pairing the soft white animal with a sound designed to terrify. Watson documented each session with clinical precision, noting exactly how many pairings it took before the fear response appeared without any sound at all, treating the child's distress as a data point to be logged rather than a warning sign to stop. And within about 2 months, something had changed permanently inside this child. The moment the rat appeared now, even with no sound at all, Albert would burst into tears, scramble away, try to crawl in the opposite direction as fast as his small body could move. Watson had done exactly what he set out to do. He had taken a neutral object, something a baby had reached for with genuine curiosity, and rewired it into a source of genuine terror, not through explanation, not through experience, through nothing but timing and a loud noise. In his own writing, Watson described this almost proudly as clean proof of a theory, with little apparent concern for what it meant that the proof was a screaming infant. But then something happened that even Watson hadn't fully anticipated. The fear didn't stay contained to the rat. Weeks later, researchers brought in a rabbit. Albert screamed and tried to crawl away, even though the rabbit had never once been paired with the noise. They brought in a dog, same reaction. A seal fur coat, same reaction. Cotton wool pulled from a bottle, same reaction. Then, in one of the most cited details of the entire study, someone put on a Santa Claus mask with a white cotton beard, and Albert broke down in terror at the sight of it. The fear had spread far beyond its original target. Anything soft, anything white, anything with fur or texture resembling that first rat now triggered the same panic. Watson called this generalization, and it revealed something the experiment hadn't set out to prove, but ended up demonstrating anyway. Once a fear response is built, its creator does not get to control where it stops. Watson could engineer the beginning of a phobia. He could not engineer its boundaries. The mind, once conditioned, took the fear and applied it wherever it found something close enough to match, quietly expanding its own definition of what counted as dangerous, without ever asking permission first. And here is where the story turns from unsettling to genuinely disturbing. Watson and his research assistant, Rosalie Rayner, never attempted to reverse what they had done. There was no follow-up session to walk Albert back toward calm. No effort to pair the rat with something positive to undo the conditioning. Watson had actually planned to attempt exactly that, a deconditioning phase, to see if the fear could be removed the same way it was installed. Using a method he sketched out involving repeated exposure alongside food and comfort. But Albert's mother removed him from the study before that phase ever began, and Watson never got another chance. The experiment simply stopped, mid-damage, with a phobia installed and left there, unfinished by design and unresolved by circumstance. Whatever happened to that fear afterward, whether it faded on its own or followed him for years, happened entirely outside anyone's observation. In a life, the researchers stopped tracking the moment it stopped being useful to them. For decades after, psychology students read about little Albert in every introductory textbook, but almost nobody knew who he actually was. His full identity was hidden behind an alias, and for over 80 years the question sat unanswered, treated almost like a footnote rather than a real person with a real family somewhere. A case study frozen in time while an actual life kept moving, unrecorded, somewhere out of frame. In 2009, a team of researchers led by psychologist Hall Beck set out to find him. Combing through Johns Hopkins hospital records, university archives, and Watson's own notes, cross-referencing birth dates and the described details of Albert's mother's employment, they eventually identified the child's real name, Douglas Merritt, the son of a wet nurse who worked at the university hospital where Watson conducted his research. And what they found about his life afterward was quietly devastating. Douglas Merritt died at just 6 years old from hydrocephalus, a buildup of fluid in the brain, a condition some researchers believe he may have already been showing early neurological signs of even during the original experiment. He never grew up. He never got the chance to outgrow the fear that had been installed in him, or to understand what had been done to him at all. Later research by a different team proposed an alternative identity entirely, a boy named William Barger, who lived into his 80s but reportedly showed a lifelong, unexplained aversion to animals, particularly dogs, according to family members interviewed decades later, who described him flinching at dogs on the street well into old age without ever knowing why. To this day, historians still debate exactly which identification is correct, and some argue the true answer may never be fully settled. But both possibilities point to the same uncomfortable truth. A real child with a real life carried the consequences of this experiment forward, whether for 6 years or 80. Watson's career, meanwhile, didn't suffer for it. If anything, the Little Albert study helped cement behaviorism as one of the dominant schools of thought in 20th century psychology. The idea that human behavior could be understood, predicted, and shaped entirely through conditioning, without needing to look inside the mind at all. Watson went on to leave academic psychology a few years later, not because of the ethics of this study, but due to an unrelated personal scandal, and moved into advertising, where he applied the exact same principles, emotional conditioning through repeated association, to sell products to adults instead of installing fear in children. He would later claim that the techniques worked just as well on grown adults buying toothpaste as they had on a 9-month-old baby, and by most accounts of his advertising career, he was right. Today, no ethics board on Earth would approve this experiment. Deliberately terrifying an infant, with no informed consent, no plan for reversal, and no long-term follow-up, violates nearly every modern principle of research ethics. The study is now taught less as a triumph of behavioral science and more as a cautionary tale, the exact example institutions point to when explaining why ethics review boards exist at all, and why the phrase informed consent carries the weight it does today. But the deeper unease here isn't just historical, it's structural. Watson proved, definitively, that a specific fear can be manufactured in a healthy mind using nothing but precise timing and repetition. That fact didn't disappear when the experiment ended. It became a foundation. Modern behavioral conditioning, from advertising to habit-forming app design to algorithmic content feeds, still rests on the same basic mechanism Watson demonstrated on a 9-month-old baby. Pair a neutral stimulus with a strong emotional response enough times, and the association sticks, often long after anyone remembers how it got there in the first place. The tools have changed, Steel bars became notification sounds. Hammers became push alerts. The underlying mechanism never needed updating, because the mechanism was never really about the rat, or the bar, or even about fear specifically. It was about how easily a mind can be taught to associate one thing with another, and how little say the mind gets in the matter once the pairing has been made enough times. Somewhere in that original 1920 footage, still viewable today, is a baby reaching toward a small white rat with nothing but curiosity. Moments later, in the same reel, is that same baby screaming, crawling away from a Santa Claus mask, terrified of a stimulus that never once hurt him directly. Watched back to back, the two moments barely look like the same child. The next time something makes you flinch, and you can't quite explain why, it might be worth asking whether that fear was ever really yours to begin with, or whether somewhere, at some point, someone simply struck the steel bar at the right moment and let the rest of you do the work of believing it.